In today's episode, I want to give you an incredibly useful tool for you to use anytime you have a presentation to deliver in public. This works whether it's a speech or a lecture or a sermon or a pitch. I learned it while doing stand-up comedy. But really, any kind of original public speaking that you're crafting and need to deliver, this is going to transform how you go about structuring and delivering your presentation in a big way. First of all, it's going to make it 1,000,000 times easier to remember what you have to say, so you're not anchored to your notes or using up all your mental bandwidth trying to remember what you want to say while you're speaking to the audience. Our brains are like computers, and you know what happens when you have too many applications or processes running in the background all at the same time. It slows down the performance of the entire computer. Sometimes things freeze or stall, and in the worst case scenario, your system can crash. Now, obviously, it's embarrassing if you go blank in the middle of your presentation and forget what you were going to say. Nobody likes to be in that situation, and it's awkward and uncomfortable for the audience too. We've all seen speakers who've gone blank in the middle of their talk, and it's just awful. You wish you had a life preserver. You could just throw the speaker to rescue him or her. But most audiences are forgiving. They know how difficult public speaking can be, and they're willing to overlook a brief stumble or trip in the middle of your presentation. And they're willing to wait for you to get back on your feet. But there's a much bigger problem at work here with not being able to remember what comes next. You see, the audience came for you. They're here to hear you deliver your content in a way that hopefully they can't get anywhere else. Remember, the content of what you're saying, that is something they can always get somewhere else. But the way you're delivering that content in your unique voice and in your one-of-a-kind style, filtered through your individual perspective, that is what they showed up for. And if you cannot be fully present with your audience and connect with them during the delivery of your presentation because you're too busy thinking, what was I supposed to say next? Or because you're giving yourself all sorts of mental instructions like, make sure to end with a story about the boy and his lost dog. And don't forget the part about the fire in the bookstore. It's impossible for the audience to be present and connect with you if you're somewhere else. And if you're not showing up for them, they're going to wonder why they bothered showing up for you. So that's problem number one that this tool is going to solve. It's going to make it easier for you to remember what you're going to say. So you don't look like a fool up there if you fumble or go blank. But more importantly, so you can be present and in connection with your audience while you're speaking with them, which is really the only reason they showed up to hear you speak in the first place. The other problem this amazing tool solves is the following. If there's one thing that you must remember when crafting and delivering any presentation, it's this. Audiences are consuming your content in a linear fashion. They have no idea where you're taking them until you take them there. They can't scroll or scrub through your talk like they can with text or recorded content. They're strapped in for a ride that they have no idea where the driver is taking them. They're literally waiting for you to release the next word and the next and the next, just to figure out where you're headed. Imagine that your friend asked you, want to go for a ride? Your first question would be, well, where are we going? Like you wouldn't willingly get into someone else's car without first knowing where they're headed. Yet that's what we make our audience do every time we launch into a talk without communicating upfront where we're going to be taking them. And that uses up the audience's bandwidth. Instead of the audience using their natural curiosity and energy to pay attention to you, their minds are busy struggling to determine where you're taking them. Instead of focusing on the content of your presentation, they're thinking, where's she going with all of this? Where does this all lead to? And if it's too tiring to keep pace with you, the audience subconsciously says, you go ahead, we'll catch up with you later. And that's obviously a fail. Rabbi Yaakov Trump, who is the rabbi of Young Israel in Cedarhurst, Lawrence, New York, and he was a magician when he was younger. A performer. And the thing about performers is that they're keenly in tune with an audience's attention and energy levels. Like they can feel the vibrations. They know when they've got them and they know when they've lost them. So before Rabbi Trump even approached the pulpit to speak, he was hyper aware of the natural dilemma that every speaker faces every time they get up to speak.
Rabbi Yaakov Trump on managing audience attention.
One of the pastimes I had was I used to do magic shows. So you mentioned you did stand-up comedy. I used to do magic shows for kids. So when I was a early teenager, I would do parties. When one does a show, when one is guiding the attention and energy of the audience, right, all the time. And so the same works with speaking, as you well know, which is that people come in with a certain amount of energy. Everything I'm saying is taking energy. It's kind of like the calories that are being consumed naturally during the day. So I'm saying things which are naturally taking away people's energy. So how am I pulling that energy up in order to be able to hold them through this process, right? So therefore, just saying things and just throwing in things and putting in tangents is wasting their energy. And there's going to be people who's going to fall off while I turn the corner over there because it's irrelevant. So how am I guiding that?
So this is the second big problem this tool is going to solve. It's going to help you manage the audience's attention like a champ. It's going to free their minds up to listen to you and be present with you and be engaged with you while you talk. So their minds are not occupied trying to figure out where you're headed next. Now, I mentioned I learned this technique from my days of doing stand-up comedy. Truthfully, everything I know about public speaking, I learned from stand-up comedy. I'm convinced it's the best school for public speaking you could ever attend. There is nothing that keeps you on your game like an audience full of strangers judging your performance every 12 seconds and reevaluating their decision to continue paying attention to you. Being a pulpit rabbi is a close second because you're under pressure to produce a new transformative sermon every single week. And during the high holiday season, it can be up to 3 times a week. And I'm grateful to have done both in my lifetime. But I think stand-up comedy has to be the Ivy League of public speaking in terms of what it can teach you about managing audience attention and speaking technique. So this is a technique I learned from Jerry Seinfeld, who learned it from the late Garry Shandling. But I'm going to refer to the technique as Jerry's arc, since I learned it from Jerry Seinfeld first. And that's arc with a C, not with a K. So here it is.
Introducing a Maggid method exclusive. Jerry's arc.
Essentially, you want to create an arc to your presentation by taking the individual sections of your talk and weaving them all together to form one easy to follow underlying narrative. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But what this does is that it helps you remember where you are in your presentation, or more accurately, your arc at any given moment. And it also gives the audience coordinates and frames of reference to make it easier for them to follow you. For example, in my comedy act, I joke about child rearing and marriage and pregnancy and growing older. But instead of just shooting out jokes at the audience in a random spitfire, I frame the bits in an intuitive chronological order. 1, jokes about dating. 2, jokes about marriage. 3, jokes about pregnancy. 4, jokes about raising kids. And 5, jokes about getting older. So my act follows the arc of the typical life cycle events. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby in the baby carriage. This simple pattern makes it easy for them to follow and also easy for them to anticipate what's coming next. So here's what I do. First, I'll briefly introduce the first theme, marriage, for example. So my wife and I have been married for, this summer will be 17 years. 17 years. I tell all my jokes on that topic. I'm a sucker for anniversaries. I'm very romantic. I see each passing year as a subsequent testimony to our undying love for each other. My wife, on the other hand, sees each passing year as more leverage in her arguments against me. She actually said this to me. She goes, "We've been married for 15 years, and you would think that it's okay to buy me a scale for my birthday?" Hey, I'm doing the best I can, okay? You should have seen what I put back on the shelf at Lowe's. Then I briefly introduce the next theme that intuitively follows, which is pregnancy. So we have 4 kids, and I was not present for the birth of any of them. And before you judge me, that was at my wife's request. She's strong. I'm weak. She had a doula in the room. I'm a do less. Do little. I'm a certified do nothing. And I just keep advancing through these life cycle events till I eventually get to the stage where I'm joking about getting older. I had to buy a nose hair trimmer. If that doesn't make you feel old, wait till that carousel of recommended products pops up on Amazon afterwards. Customers who looked at nose hair trimmers also looked at adult diapers. And a casket. So by creating an underlying narrative or story to the act that weaves all the themes of the individual parts together, however loose it may be, and briefly introducing these coordinates to the audience, it provides the audience with a constant frame of reference of where I am in my act and where I'm headed next. This frees their minds up to be able to listen and pay attention to me at 100% capacity without them wondering where I'm taking them next. And it also makes it super easy for me to remember where I am in the act and what comes next. If it's a joke about pregnancy, for example, I know that the child rearing part of my routine is right around the corner. I have so much PTSD from driving with my kids in the car. I'll be alone in the car by myself, and I'll just flip out. I was driving down the street in Eastmore. There was a sign on the street that said, "Drive like your kids live here." I'm like, okay, would you just shut up? Get out! We're not going anywhere. This is a privilege. I got so tired of threatening to turn the car around and go home. I drive everywhere in reverse now. We never get that far anyways. Might as well just be pointed due home. Jerry Seinfeld noticed early on that comedian Garry Shandling used this arc technique in his act. Listen to this short conversation that was recorded backstage post-show where they analyze the arc technique and explain its impact on the audience.
Jerry Seinfeld and Garry Shandling discuss the arc.
I talked to somebody, I was talking to you about you to somebody one time. We were talking about the validity of having structure to an act, an arcing structure to the whole act. And you were and I used to notice about you in very early days. I don't even know if you know this about yourself. I'm sure you do. You would have a way of, with your hands, of making the audience think there is an overarching story that I'm telling you. And you would keep telling you, and you would, I don't even remember how you do it. You do something like this, you go, so anyway, you have like your hand like this.
Right.
Like we're going back to the theme now.
I know.
You do a joke, and then, anyway, and the effect was that we're seeing a larger story being told.
That's accurate.
And the thing is, how much does that really help individual jokes when you have an arc is it better for a comedian to have an arc? I mean, you would kind of you gave the illusion of having one, which I think, don't you think that helped the jokes?
Yeah, I think first of all, stylistically, I have a method of starting to tell a story. So I was with this woman, and we were on the couch.
Right.
We had gone to this restaurant, and then I'm off on the tangent.
Right.
So then I go, after 10 minutes, I go, anyway, so we're on the couch.
Right.
That's
you did it tonight with the dog.
Yeah.
You did it tonight with the
dog.
The dog begins in
right.
5 minutes of something else, and then so the dog was laying there.
Right.
Yeah, it's cool.
Now,
no,
I think, frankly, and I never thought of this till right now, seriously, I inherited that style from my mother, who starts a story and goes off, and you have to say to her, remember what you were talking about.
Right.
Well, I'm able to do that. So, but I have inherited part of the style where I start up, and then as we're talking now, I could say, by the way, that comedian who did the, and go off on that, and come back and go, anyway, sorry, and keep going. And I do think it's how people talk, and the audience can follow. And sometimes I used to have to say, sorry, don't you jump around when you talk. But I do think that, as a writer and so forth, that the arc and and there's more story to be told than just the jokes. I think it leaves the audience with some sense of, who you are.
So how does Jerry's arc work for say, a sermon? Last High Holidays, I was coaching a rabbi on his sermon. His topic was, how do you forgive people who have wronged you but show no remorse? Which I thought was a really relevant and impactful topic. It hits you right between the eyes. But no matter how many times I read through it, I still could not follow his message. And he started off in a straight line. But then he swerved left, telling a story about the Holocaust. Then he took a sharp right turn, introducing a new definition of forgiveness. Then he veered left again. By the end of his talk, I felt like we had been driving around in circles for 10 minutes. Instead of being inspired and uplifted, his sermon made me feel dizzy and carsick. But the good news was, this was an easy fix. Based on Jerry's arc, we threaded the big themes of his presentation together, and we constructed an arc out of them, briefly introducing each of these themes before each turn that he took. For example, we first articulated the sermon's big question to the audience. How do you forgive those who have wronged you but don't show any remorse? And I had him really build up the tension until the audience would be dying to know the answer. And you do that by laying out the stakes. What's at stake? Why is it important for us to be able to answer this question for ourselves? How does knowing this information make our lives better? And the point of that is to get the audience really invested in hearing the answer, so they'll want to pay attention to you. Anyways, then we open the second section by articulating. Here are some of the traditional definitions of forgiveness and why they fall short. So the audience knows where you are, and you know where you are, and everybody can kind of sense what's coming next, which is a new alternative definition of forgiveness that has the potential to transform their lives, even though they don't actually know the content of what you're going to say, but their minds are settled enough, just knowing the general roadmap of where you're taking them. We're going from having a big burning question to answers that don't work to answers that do work. And sensing this direction, the audience is now freed up to be able to focus all their attention on you. Here's what the rabbi had to say after we worked on his High Holiday sermon together.
He gave me some insights on where, as an attentive audience member, attentive Karyan, from their perspective, where are we getting lost in translation, what is becoming unclear, and it really helped me focus on my message with a logical sequence to make that message come through.
You'll be surprised at how well this technique works, and it doesn't require much effort at all on your part. Other than constructing some loose type of arc or pattern to your presentation, which ties all of the individual parts together in a way that's stupid simple for the audience to follow along, and then communicating that arc or pattern to your audience. This is exactly what Steve Jobs did in his famous commencement speech at Stanford University, which has been viewed over 50 million times.
Steve Jobs, communicating the arc.
Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. My second story is about love and loss. My third story is about death.
You see how, right from the start, the audience knows how long the trip is going to be and where they are at any given point along the way. If it's easier, think of your presentation as individual acts in a play, which progress from act to act to act in some intuitive type of manner. The main point is that every single time, you should be able to quickly and easily identify the main themes of your presentation and arrange them in a sequence that is logical and easy to follow. This goes a huge way in terms of being able to remember what you're going to say, and also reassuring the audience that they're in experienced professional hands. The audience are the passengers in your plane. And when you do this, you're sending them the following message. Your pilot has a route. You can sit back now and enjoy the ride. I respect you. I respect your time and your attention and your right to not be left in the dark about the itinerary of this trip. Never underestimate how powerful this technique is in terms of its ability to put the audience at ease, earn their trust, and command their undivided attention towards you. It's a very, very satisfying feeling for the audience. Listen to how veteran comedian Steve Martin describes Jerry Seinfeld's act. He describes it from the perspective of an audience member who is watching and following Jerry perform his act, as if he was a passenger on a plane.
Steve Martin on being a passenger in Jerry Seinfeld's plane.
I don't describe Jerry as observational. I mean, when I see Jerry's show, I feel like I kind of described it as sitting back in an easy chair with this sort of great pilot, and it's a very gentle comedian, and it's just this beautiful rhythm that flows and flows and flows.
You're kind of a funny tour guide to the whole world.
And that's Jerry's arc. You want to create an arc to your presentation by taking the individual sections of your talk and weaving them all together to form one easy to follow underlying narrative, and then communicating that arc or pattern to your audience. Jerry's arc helps you remember where you are in your presentation, or more accurately, your arc at any given moment. And it gives your audience the coordinates and frames of reference they need to make it easier for them to follow along. That's it for me. Until next time, I'm Daniel Steinberg, and you've been listening to the Maggid Method. Do you want to become a better speaker or appear more of a polished and professional speaker? Well, that's a shame, because typically when people go down the polished and professional road, they end up destroying the authentic elements of their speech, thinking that something different is needed in order to present to audiences. I know this because I killed my natural speaking style, stuffing it with overly sophisticated vocabulary words and content that was meant to impress people with how polished and professional I was. The reality? It distanced me emotionally from my audience, made me appear aloof, difficult to follow, and 100% unmemorable. Luckily, I turned that car around. Your own words and your own unique personality is what attracts the individuals in your life who give you their attention and want to be influenced by you. And an audience is just an assembly of individuals. My bet is that you already possess everything you already need to be a great speaker. And if you're willing to abandon conformity and start leveraging what works for you, instead of searching for external techniques to fit the traditional speaker mold, you will experience one of the most freeing and most fulfilling feelings in the world. So, dear listener, if you just want to appear more polished and professional, hold on to your money. I can't in good conscience take it. But if you want to access your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience, you and I should talk. You can reach me at daniel@maggidmethod.com. It's Daniel at maggidmethod, maggidmethod.com. I conduct half-day workshops for individuals and groups, either in person or on Zoom. I'm here for you.